Okay, so diseases, pests, and pesticides. One of the things, a lot of the beginning bee classes usually kind of keep this to the end, and I find that when the next class we're having after Easter will be actually in the hives and starting talking about inspections and what you do. And if you don't already know about diseases, pests, and pesticides and how to recognize things, it's really hard to relate it back to what you were supposed to be doing when you were in a hive in the first place. So we're going to start it right here. And also, one of the things, if you get package bees, there's something that you can do related to one of the pests, and I'll talk about that quickly. But anyway, so this one in the book, if you've got the book or if you have any beekeeping book, when they start to talk about diseases and pests and pesticides, they get into a whole lot of detail, and I find that it's kind of hard to relate to it. This is typically a 2-hour class, so I've got it down to about an hour, maybe a little less. And there'll be a bunch of questions, and there'll be a bunch of things you need to know. I'm going to include some links in the chat in a little while. And they go to things like different kind of videos and things like that. I'll also put the links on my website, and I'll be sending out a newsletter this week. So watch for that to come, and it'll also include the links in it. So there are things that will show you how some of these things actually work. So bees are exposed, and you've got the chat, right? So
Yep.
so bees are exposed to all kinds of things, just like humans, right? So there's the varroa mite that can show up and attach to them. There's tracheal mites that can get in through the spiracles where they breathe and get into the breathing apparatus. There's fungal spores that can get into their gut through food. There's all kinds of virus and bacterias. The varroas vector a bunch of viruses. Nosema is a fungal kind of thing. And so there's all kinds of ways that they can pick up things, just like humans, right? So we're going to talk about some of those things. But before we talk about the specific things, just some general comments. Just like humans, healthy bees and strong colonies can deal a lot at what comes at them. So whether it's a disease, a virus, a pesticide, a pest, they can usually deal with it fairly well as long as they're really strong and they're healthy bees. And more we're breeding bees that can deal with a lot of these things. So that's one of those things that we talk about all the time is breeds of bees, and are they especially hygienic, so they're cleaning up after themselves all the time, so that if there's any kind of anything in the hive, it's getting cleaned out, or varroa sensing, those kinds of things. And the things that we can do is we can help them by making sure that they have good nutrition, strong queens, and a safe environment. And there are some things we'll talk about as we talk about big pests in particular that we can do to help keep them protected. And then we can also use what's called integrated pest management, IPM, as much as possible. And I'm going to talk about that after we kind of go through some of these other things, because it's something I use a lot, and a lot of it's pretty much good beekeeping standards these days. And early detection and response is critical. So when the saying "make hay while the sun shines," every week I'm looking at the weather and planning on when I'm going to be in bees this time of year, and I plan other stuff around the bees. Kathy, you need to be muted again, if you can. Thank you. And you have to be ready to respond really, really quickly, because if you delay a few days, you can lose your colonies. It really is that fast. So I'm going to start with the big three, and these are things that everybody deals with at some level. So there's the Varroa destructor, the small hive beetle, and wax moths. So those are the big three that we talk about all the time. The Varroa destructor gets a lot of airtime at all the conferences and in all the literature, um, and you know, pretty much anything you hear about bees is the Varroas comes in there. So we're going to start with the Varroa. And this particular version of the Varroa is called the destructor, and it is really very destructive. It was initially found in Asian honeybees, and they're not really a problem there. So the Asian honeybees are smaller, and their time from egg to you know, emerging is less than 21 days, and their drones are probably about 21 days. And that makes a difference when we start talking about life cycle of the Varroa. That time makes a big difference. So remember, we talked a little bit about foundation and the different things that humans have done that have affected the honeybees. And one of the things is making foundation where the cells are a little bigger, because the bees will grow to fit the cell so that they're bigger bees and they can do more honey and all those other things that are really nice. But now we've added a couple of days to the life cycle of the honeybee. And unfortunately, you know, that wasn't a problem when we originally did this, but now we have bigger bees with 21 and 24 days. And for the Varroa, that's perfect. So that's one of the things. They were first introduced into the US or first reported in 1986. And it's all we've been talking about since then. They feed on the fat body of bees. You'll see in a lot of the literature, including this particular book, that they're feeding on the blood, and that's not true. That's one of the things that we found, is they really are feeding on the fat body. And the mite is actually not the problem. Um, the viruses that vectors are the problem. So the last I heard, there were about 24 different vectors that were being, or viruses that were being vectored by the varroa mite. So when it goes and it starts feeding, it's also putting these viruses, exposing the bees to these viruses. So that's one of the big problems. So if it were just the mite, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But because they vector all these viruses, and some viruses that the bees could have probably gotten anyway, but they're just much more exposed because of it. And you have to really monitor, or you're going to lose your bees. And every year, the you know, we have counts when we're actually monitoring. So there's levels where, you know, you can, where you have to either treat or not treat, and those are going down and down and down. So pretty much if you have varroa, you're going to be doing something to try to deal with them. There's different things you can do with them, and if you don't, you'll lose your bees. And then if there's bees within 2 miles of you, they will probably end up losing their bees. And I have been through that before.
Can you do the
What's the
links?
question?
The links?
Yeah.
No question.
Okay.
Can you do the links?
Yeah, go ahead and do the links. So John's going to put the links for some different things in the chat, and I'll explain what those things are. So this is the life cycle of the varroa, and you really have to know life cycle of some of these pests for a good reason. So it starts at the very top, where a varroa gets on a bee, and there it says it's feeding on the hemolymph, and that's not true. It's really the fat body. So and so it's actually most likely it might come in on a forager, but what it'll do is it's going to move on to one of the nurse bees, because what it really wants to do is it wants to get in with the larva just before it gets capped. So about day 8, before the larva starts into the pupal phase, it'll be on. So it'll be on the worker bees, the nurse bees, so that it can jump off and get into the cell. So it'll get into the cell, and then, you know, in the bottom of the cell is the bee food, the worker jelly, And so what it does is it has like little snorkel things it puts up. So it hides down in there. You can see in number 3, it's hiding under the larva, and it puts these little snorkel things up so that it can breathe and doesn't drown in there. And then once it gets capped, what it'll do is it'll actually move um, onto the larva. It's not in the pupal stage quite yet because it hasn't um, done its spun its cocoon yet, and so it'll like attach itself and start feeding on it. And then about 60 hours after the cell is capped, it'll start laying eggs. And the first one it lays is a male, and then every 30 hours it'll lay a female. And then what'll happen as the eggs hatch and the babies are also feeding on this poor pupa, and it'll continue to feed on it. And when they get old enough, they'll actually mate with that first male. So depending on how long she's in the mother varroa is in the cell depends on how many fully grown females and mated females it gets. With a worker bee, it's usually just one or maybe two. If it's a drone cell, since it's another 3 days, it can be like three, and then you're really getting a lot. So what comes out is the original mother and any of the adult females that are mated. The males and any of the females that aren't yet old enough will just die. But then you also now have a bee who's coming out and it's got all these viruses and all these various issues associated with it. And then the cycle just starts all over again. But now you have two varroa out there, um, at least two. And so this is really a problem. So that's kind of the life cycle of the varroa. And then how do you know how many you have in there and if you should treat or not? So there's a couple of different ways that we monitor. One of them, there's something called a sugar shake, and that's the most common one. And three of these links that John's putting out there, two of them are videos. Well, one of them's a video of one way to do a sugar shake. One of them is a link to my website where Bobby Bird, who worked with me in the bees for a while, is doing a sugar shake in a different format. Um, the big change is how you get the bees into the jar. There's also something called an alcohol wash, and that's fairly common and just a little bit more reliable than a sugar shake. And I'll touch on that in a minute. There's an ether roll, and that one's it's not really recommended for hobby beekeepers, so I'm not really going to talk about that very much. Sticky boards, they're for monitoring, they're only really effective if you're also using it with a sugar shake. It's sort of a secondary, and there's a bunch of stuff you need to know. So they're not really all that effective. Sticky boards with the screen bottom boards, they have a board that actually goes in underneath it. You can just slide it in and out. And basically what you do is you just put a thin layer of Crisco or Vaseline or something on it, put it in for 24 hours, and then you can actually count how many varroa. And that's also good because you get the varroa will stick to it, and you can get rid of some of them that way too. So, but if you're doing if you're just using it to monitor levels, it's no longer effective on its own. And then visual monitoring, there's a couple of things you can do. You can uncap uh, um, drone brood and roll them around a little bit and see if there's any varroa in there. You can, physically look to see if you see varroa walking around, attached to one of your bees. If you can see them, you've got too many. I'll just tell you that right now. Because not only do they attach to the top of the bee, but they also attach to the underside of the bee. And so if you're seeing them, you've already got too many. So we're going to talk a little bit about the sugar shake. The sugar shake or the alcohol wash are really the most effective means we have at this point of being able to monitor what the mite load is. So you can either make your own kit, and this is well, one of my preferred. So you have some kind of a bin or something to shake bees into. You don't have to do that if you're really good about scraping bees off the frames with a jar, you can do that. You have some kind of a jar, either a pint or a quart jar with a lid, and then you can make just a mesh top for it. You want a measuring cup that's about a half a cup. A half a cup turns out is about 100 milliliters of bees or about 300 bees. So people have actually counted, and it's, give or take one or two bees. So, it's easy to just do a half a cup of bees. Confectioner's sugar, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna, once they get in the jar, we're gonna put powdered sugar on them, and we're going to shake them a whole bunch. And then the powdered sugar will help dislodge any of the mites that are on the bees. And then because of the screen top that's on the jar, we'll shake it back out onto a plate, something white. And then if you kind of spritz it a little bit, the powdered sugar will melt, and it's easier to see the um, the varroa, and then you just count the varroa. So basically, with if you have those tools, you can do it that way. You can also just buy. There's a this varroa easy check that you can buy from most of the bee supplies. They cost about 20 bucks, and you can use those as well, and they come with instructions on how to use it. So so what we do is you can either scoop the bees, and the videos will show you how you can scoop bees. Well, you can, if to take them off a frame, if you can either scoop up to where you're trying to get bees in the frame, or you can actually roll them down the backs of the bees, and the bees will fall in the jar. To get the right pressure is not easy. So one of the things that I found is you just take a frame that you want, and you just give it a good shake into the bin. um, the forager bees will usually fly away. You'll be left mostly with the nurse bees. You can just sort of tap the um, tub on one corner, scoop a half a cup, put them in the jar, put the lid on it, put some powdered sugar on it, shake them, shake them, shake them, shake them, let them sit for a couple minutes, and then shake them out onto shake the through the mesh onto the plate. And the good thing is it doesn't kill the bees. If you're going to do an alcohol wash, instead of doing powdered sugar, you put alcohol on the bees, and then you can shake the alcohol out, and the varroa will come with it. But then you have 300 dead bees. When you're done with the sugar shake, you just dump the bees back onto the top of the frames, or you can put them on the inner cover, and the other bees will clean them up. They look like ghost bees, and they'll be kind of grumpy, but they'll be fine. So look at the videos when you get a chance, that show you how to actually do these, because you really kind of have to do it to get used to doing it. And then you're looking at it, and what you'll see is these little sort of brownish red dots. You'll see other things too, because pollen and other debris will fall in there. So this is the things that are circled. Those are varroa, and that's what we do is we count them. So in this case, there were 4 per 300 bees. So that's just a little over 1 per 100. So depending on the time of year, I may or may not treat. I did have one hive that was varroa bombed, and it had all kinds of problems. And when I did the sugar shake on it, this is what I found. And this is not what you want to find. So this is, I think when I lost count, there were over 90 in there. So, and, if you figure for every one you're seeing, there's at least 2. For in this case, it really was just it was just really, really sad. It was just really bad. So this hive did not make it. So this is one of the links that John put in the chat, and this is a brochure that talks about how to do a sugar shake and how to put all this stuff together, or you can do an alcohol wash. It's a PDF brochure, so you can download it. So that's one thing. And then, so what do you do? So this is one of the tables that tell you if you should treat or not. So if you have, um, in this case, okay, so they have all these different things. So dormant with brood, um, in like October when the queen quits laying, you may still have brood, but she's not laying anymore. And so those are considered dormant. Dormant without brood would be, um, and there are times in the summer, depending on what kind of bees you have as well, that'll be dormant with brood. Um, and the carniolans in particular, she'll just stop laying for a while. Dormant without brood, it could be, when you get a package, when you get bees just coming out of spring or going into winter before, once all the brood has emerged. Um, so if there's less than one in any of those cases, that's really good. You don't have to do anything. If it gets to be more than two or three, you really probably ought to do something, especially going into winter. If you've got two or three going into winter, um, you really, because they're going to need to make it through winter and through early spring before you can get into them. So it's probably best to do some kind of treatment. Population increase is what's happening now. It's going from, I don't know, 10,000 bees maybe making it through winter to 50, 60,000 bees. So it's ramping up really, really fast. And this one says that if you've got 2 to 3%, you probably ought to treat. But what I was told recently was if you've even got one, you should probably be treating now, because in the summers when it really peaks, and then you're more likely to have a whole lot and be in a situation where you maybe can't get ahead of it. And any of these other ones that say if you've got, you know, less than 2% for peak population, um, I would at 2%, I would definitely still at peak population, I would probably treat. And then population decrease as it's going back down in the fall, it'll go up. And so there's less brood, so there's more phoretic mites. So phoretic means they're actually on the worker bees wandering, or the drones wandering around in the bees that are wandering around in the hive. And so I assume that there's, I don't have to account for ones that are maybe in cells somewhere. So I'm more likely to not treat unless I'm at 2 or 3% with those. Unless again, I'm going into winter and then I'm going to be really careful. So those are one of those things. And this is one of those things that everybody kind of has their own way of doing it. Um, and some people don't like to treat at all and they like to try different things. So we're going to talk about some of the things. Some of the viruses and the things that you'll see if you have a varroa infestation is deformed wing virus. So in the picture at the top left, you can see the bee that's circled in the top left corner of that picture. It's got a varroa on its thorax. So that's what they look like, and that's how big they are. But like I said, in this picture, that's the only varroa I see, but I bet you because this one was the one that had, at least 99. And I bet there were some that were underneath that I wasn't seeing them. And then that poor little worker bee down in the right corner, that's what deformed wing virus looks like. They come out and they're all shrivelly. Sometimes the bees coming out of there are seriously deformed. And originally, I kind of left them alone because I thought, well, they're never going to be foragers and they're not going to live very long. But what's the harm? Well, the harm is that they're nurse bees and they're going to be feeding larvae and they're passing on the deformed wing virus. So if you start to see that, you've really got to treat and you've got to get those. I pluck them out and just throw them away. Um, so that's really one of those cases where, even if the mite load isn't high, if you see deformed wing virus, you're going to have to do something. And then parasitic mite syndrome, also called PMS, is something that you'll see a lot coming out of winter, because a lot of the hives will die during winter of basically parasitic mite syndrome. So that's kind of what it looks like on the right. And you can even see in some of those cells, there are even varroa still in the cell, feeding on the larvae that are dying in there. So commercial treatments, there's Apistan, which is a fluvalinate. It's actually a pesticide, and it's one of the ones that the bees are starting to adapt to. It's one of the problems we've had over the years. Coumaphlos was one of the original treatments that we used, and the bees just adapted to them, and they became a little more resistant to anything. So that's off the market. So Apistan is one of them. Apivar is one of the new ones. It's only a few years old, and its main ingredient is amitraz. And I just heard in the last few weeks that the bees now, or the varroa, are now becoming resistant to them. People are actually finding varroa hanging out on the apivar strips. So that's a really bad sign. So both of those are pesticides. They're considered hard treatments. Apilife Bar is fairly new too. It came along about the same time that Apivar came, maybe a little bit sooner than that. And it's more it's one of the soft treatments, and it uses thymol, eucalyptus oil, menthol, and camphor. So that's a pretty effective one, and it's still working. The essential oils, the varroa don't seem to be developing the resistance to the essential oils yet. And Apigard's been around a really long time, and it's thymol. Thymol is just the essential oil of the thyme plant. So, we use that in cooking all the time. So when you're using those, you'll really notice the smell when you get near the hives. Hopguard is messy, and it's really best to use it when there's not brood, and it's actually uses it's made from hops. Formic acid is one of the natural, we have that in nature. And there's Formic Pro and Mite Away quick strips. Formic acid is the only one that actually can get to the varroa that are in the cells. So that's the only one. And oxalic acid is fairly new, and you're really supposed to only use it when the hive is broodless. And you can either do it with a drizzle. I usually do a drizzle in the wintertime when it's about 40 degrees, or you can do vaporization. Now, the drizzle thing is, you can also put it in a squirty bottle. And so those of you who are getting packages, what I do when I get a package is, first I spray them with sugar syrup really well, and then give them about 2 hours so that they can eat that and fill their stomachs. And then I spritz them with oxalic acid solution in sugar syrup. And then after a couple of hours, then I put them in the hive. I don't really know if this is actually approved. I've heard it in conferences, but a lot of our speakers are not from North Carolina. So, and I did try to reach out to the apiary inspector, and I haven't heard back from him. So, but I think it's legal to do that. The instructions will say once you spritz them with oxalic acid, leave them for 72 hours. I have no idea why they would leave them that long. That just didn't make any sense to me. So, and I've had really good luck doing that with packages, because then you're starting with bees that are already in really pretty good shape. And also, if they've got all that food in their stomach, they're way easier to install. So that's just something that you can do. And if you to buy oxalic acid, it used to be Brushy Mountain Bee was the only bee supplier who could legally sell oxalic acid. But now I think they're out of business. So I think Man Lake is now doing it. And so there's specific instructions about how you do it. It's like 38 grams of oxalic acid. It's dry. It's a dry powder, and you mix it in with a liter of 1-to-1 sugar syrup, and that's kind of enough to do a whole bunch of hives. So you really need to follow the instructions, because you could do damage to your bees otherwise. So how do you decide what you should use? Well, this is a really great brochure. It's through the Honeybee Health Coalition. And it goes through every possible thing that you could use to deal with Varroa. Some of them, like the Appolife bar and the Apogard, are real temperature sensitive, and also the formic acid is real temperature sensitive. So we get really, really hot here pretty quick. So there's only windows when you can successfully use those. The problem isn't so much with um, the effectiveness is affected by the temperature. It's really that it becomes the smells are just too strong and will drive the bees out, especially the thymol or the formic acid. Formic acid is pretty smelly anyway. So those are some of the issues. And then some of them, like I said, require broodless. So the oxalic acid, we're only supposed to use it when they're broodless. And Hopguard, you can use it when there's brood in it, but it's so messy that it really is better if you just do it when they're broodless. So that's another one of those. And this is such a good resource. It's really one of the best ones. And I use it as a reference all the time because there's no way in the world you're going to remember all this stuff. So get this reference. You can, if you just go to honeybeehealthcoalition.org/Varroa, it'll give you different, there's the first option is for this PDF of this brochure, and it's just really, really helpful. So there's also something called Certified Naturally Grown program. So if you really want to do natural beekeeping, they have requirements for how you can do treatments, and so that's another one you can look at. And for the apiary standards, it was actually the person who got it all going and did the original standards is actually somebody who's from Forsyth County. So that was kind of cool. So anyway, that's another thing you can look at. Small hive beetles is another one of the pests that you're going to see. They first appeared in Florida in 1998. They came from Africa. They're kind of, they're beetles. We have all kinds of beetles that will get on plants and whatever, and we're dealing with beetles all the time. The problem is we can't use the same kinds of things in the beehives to deal with these beetles as you can on a plant. So, they really like the honey, and they'll lay in the honey and they'll just slime it up. So, and they look like little armored critters. So this is what they look like on the left, although they're not more than a quarter inch. In fact, probably a little smaller than that. And that's what they're when they lay them. That's what the um, little worms look like when they come out, and they're really just awful, and they're really just gross. So we got to talk about life cycle of the hive beetle as well, and its life cycle isn't all that um, big, really. So hive beetle gets in the cell. Sometimes they come along with packages, or they can fly in or whatever. It lays an egg, and it'll hatch in a couple of days, and then you've got the larvae that are basically little wormy things that are really ugly, and they're tunneling around, and they're just making a slimy mess in the honey mostly, but they can also get in the pollen and the brood and the eggs. And in the woodenware, she'll lay in the woodenware, and it'll actually destroy, make a mess of the woodenware. They don't pupate in the hive. So this is kind of a good thing, but what they'll do is they'll crawl out and they'll pupate in the dirt under the hive. And then they'll emerge out of the dirt, and then they come back into the hive, and then there's more of them, and then they start to cycle all over again. So what do you do? What do you do with the small hive beetles? Well, you can trap them. There are all kind of traps available, and people are forever coming up with new ideas. So if you want to buy beetle blaster traps, are about 99 cents a piece. You can just put them in the hive. You put some oil in there. The beetles go in there, and they basically die. So lots of different kind of traps. People are putting, Swiffer things in the hive to trap them. It also gets a few bees in there. You can, if you just, if you really want to learn about different traps for hive beetles, you can just Google it, and there is just YouTube examples everywhere. The other thing you can do is you can disrupt the pupal process. So like I said, they pupate in the dirt under the hive. And so you can put some diatomaceous earth down there. And I did that for a while where I would actually like rub it into the dirt a little bit to make sure that it didn't get on the bees because it'll kill the bees. But what it does is it basically scratches up the pupa and then they bleed to death. So then that's, you know, that's one way to deal with them. Recently I started using nematodes and that's really worked really well. And nematodes are just, you know, these ones are microscopic. They're specifically made for these kind of beetles. You basically water them in or under the hives and within 3 feet of the hives. And then when the pupa go into when the little larvae crawl into the dirt to pupate, these nematodes will eat them. And so I don't deal with hive beetles. I get maybe one or two, but I don't really have to deal with hive beetles very much. So that's really worked really well for me. The other thing that you can do is once you've got an infestation of like larvae on the frames, probably the best thing to do is freeze them and then you'll have to clean them up. But you know, that's one of the things that is a big problem and trapping them. They're fast, fast, fast. You can't catch them. I mean, if you could, I mean, we get to, one of the things that you do is you get to be pretty good with your hive tool trying to smash them as they go. And the bees will actually sort of hurt them. So we place traps in corners because the bees will hurt them that way and then they'll end up in the trap. So that's one of the things. Wax moths are the other one. Wax moths, oh my God, I hate these more than anything. Um, and all hives will have wax moths, but if it's a really strong hive, they'll be able to deal with it. So this is a really good reason to keep really strong hives and also not to over super or add you know, too much extra hardware onto the hive. And they're really prominent in the brood comb. They're going after the pollen. And so the pictures down below, you can see, you know, these are moths. So they're webby. Oh wait, I said the hive beetles do the hurt the wood. It's not, it's the wax moths that hurt the wood. So on the far right, you'll see that she's actually laid on the wood and there'll actually be big grooves in the wood and it's compromised and it'll just look really bad. And you'll see in the brood, if it hasn't gotten as bad as the picture on the left or the picture on the right, what you will see is this webby stuff moving through your brood frames. And that's a pretty good indication that there's something going on, that you've got wax moths and you're going to need to deal with them because really fast they will take over and then you will have totally compromised equipment. And there's not a lot you can do once they make a big mess of it like that. So how do we deal with wax moths? Well, strong hives are the best defense. Like I said, and traps, you can make your own. The traps for wax moths are outside of the hive. You know, you take and there's instructions all over the internet about this. You basically take like a liter bottle and you do a mixture of vinegar and banana peels and sugar syrup, and you put it in there and you make a little opening and um, it'll attract all kinds of things. It'll attract wax moths, but it'll also attract things like other kinds of bees and hornets and wasps and yellow jackets and other things like that. And then when they get full, you just throw the thing away, or you can clean it out if you want. If they're in there, the best thing to do is to freeze the frames. And one of the things that is a real problem is if you lose your bees early on in the season, um, you really need to freeze frames or do something to protect your frames because it's not uncommon that the wax moths will just move in and start destroying equipment. So this is really kind of a big one. You can spray frames with BT. It's the last I read, it was being approved by the USDA for a long time. BT, which is Bacillus um, let's see, I can never remember how to pronounce it, Thuringiensis. And it's a biologic, so it's kind of a spore thing, and it'll eat the larva. So I actually use this. I spray my woodenware and my frames before I put them in, and it'll usually last for about a year and a half. If I lose hives, I'll pull out and I will spray them with. I'll pull out equipment and I'll just spray it. I'll clean it up and then I'll spray it with BT. I'll just warn you that if you spray um, pollen in the cells with BT, it'll petrify and it might end up looking like what did we call it? Chalk brood. So just so you know about that. The other thing you can do is there's something called um, di, dichlorobenzene. It's a moth crystal, but it's not like the moth crystals you would use in your closet or something. It's a specific kind, and you can store frames with those crystals, but then they have to be aired out, and it's also considered a pesticide. So those are things that you can do. Other kinds of diseases, nosema, and I'm just kind of doing the ones that are most likely first. So nosema, there are two kinds of nosema. There's nosema apis and nosema cerana. It's in the gut. It's a fungus in the gut of the bee. Nosema apis used to be really serious, but it's not as common anymore. And it's basically identified with dysentery. So what'll happen is you'll find that the bees are pooping a whole lot, either in the hive or outside the hive. I mean, that's the only way to put it. Um, bees can also have dysentery for other reasons. So if you are doing sugar syrup with raw sugar or something like that, and that's not the white sugar, there's ash and other things in there that can disrupt their systems and can actually cause dysentery. Bees coming out of winter, if it's been a really hard winter and they've had to be holding, in their um, rectum, and they could end up with dysentery. And there's different things you can do to just help them out there, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Nosema cerana is more prevalent now, and really with both of these, the best way to detect them is under a microscope. And there's a way that you can actually take a bunch of bees and put them in alcohol, rip their heads and their thorax off so that you just have their abdomens, put it in a baggie with some water, and then you roll it and smush them until you make sort of a slurry. And then you put a drop on a slide, put it under the microscope, and you can actually see they look like spores under the microscope. And they're two different kinds. So it's not uncommon for bees to have both, and if they're healthy bees, they'll be fine. So and a healthy hive can die pretty quickly with Nosema cerana. I'm guessing that the reason that my one hive collapsed this year was because it had Nosema cerana. And I get so focused on um, the Varroa that I forget to do some of these other things. So what can you do? Most of the treatments recommend using Fumagellin B, and that's no longer recommended. One thing you can do to help them is you could do a honeybee healthy drench. Honeybee healthy is just um, there's Honeybee Healthy is the name brand, but there's another one out there as well that's the same thing, but it's spearmint oil and lemongrass oil in lecithin, and then you just mix it with sugar syrup. It's an attractant, but what you want to do for a drench is you make it more concentrated than they normally would eat on their own. And so you basically pour it over them, and the spearmint in there will help clear out their digestive system. So it's one of the things that I do during the summer months when I remember to do it, when I'm not just focused on Varroa. And if it's about 80 degrees, that really works well to do it then. And I do it about once a month during those months. So that really seems to help. European foul brood is on the rise again. We've been seeing a lot of it. We've been having a lot of rainy weather and a lot of humidity and poor nutrition because we have two big nectar flows, one in the spring and one in the fall, and they've, sometimes been rained out or we've had droughts. And so bees will get, not a lot of good nutrition. It's real stressful for them. And so they might get European foul brood. Um, so this is kind of what it looks like. The larva will die in sort of more twisted, they'll look more twisted. All larvae should be white, glossy, pretty. If you start to see discolored larvae, something's going on in there. You'll also get a little bit of a sour smell, although I have to say you have to be careful because when the goldenrod is blooming, and the bees are bringing in pollen from goldenrod, it has a real sort of vinegary smell as well. So I sort of think of it as fermented gym shoes or something, locker room. That's what goldenrod smells like to me. But anyway, so there's kind of a sour smell to it, so you might notice that. Um, so one of the things we do for both of the foul broods is we do a test where, so if in that picture you see where there's still a little bit of cat brood, I would just take a matchstick, put it in there, sort of swish it around, and then pull it out. And if it just comes out and it's yucky, but it's not ropey at all, in other words, it's not like if you like when you bite into mozzarella on pizza and it kind of strings out. If it doesn't look like that, then it could be European foul brood. If it's ropey, then it's going to be probably American foul brood. But what do you do if you think you have European foul brood? Call the apiary inspector um, and ask them to come and check it out because it could be other things. And there's different ways that they can recommend that you deal with foul brood. It could be that you just get a different queen and requeen. It could be that you sequester your queen so that they're broodless for a while. There's different kinds of, food supplements you might be able to give them. If they tell you you need terramycin, you're going to have to get it from a veterinarian that's part of the Honeybee Veterinary Consortium, and that's the best way to find that is there's a website hbvc.org, and there's more of those that are coming on now. But anyway, so that's one of the things you can do. And how do you get a hold of your apiary inspector? Well, in North Carolina, if you go to the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, under plant industry, I don't know why. I guess because of pollinators and, they're servicing the plant industry. There's apiary inspectors. So you just figure out which area you are in, and then there'll be phone numbers and emails and things underneath that for the area that you're in. These are great guys. You can just call them and they'll come out, tell them, and they'll talk to you on the phone too. And it depends on where you are of how responsive they are, but they're usually really good guys. So that's one of the things you should do. If it's American foul brood, you see below how it's kind of ropey, where you pull the stick out and it's still kind of going. So it's this irregular pattern. It's really going to smell bad. It's not going to, if you do the stick and it's ropey, you don't even have to go any further. What you need to do is absolutely, absolutely call the apiary inspector because it's very infectious. They will help you figure out how to deal with your equipment, they'll be able to tell you if your whole apiary is infected or if it's just one. And, we only get 3 or 4 instances in a year. So this is one of the really, really serious ones. And like I said, I've never actually seen it. So that's really good. Other diseases you may encounter, sac brood, usually with parasitic mite syndrome. Here again, you see the little guy, it's like a little sac in there. He's turned brown. It looks like he's tail up. That's not uncommon. Chalk brood, it really is just little mummified larvae. They really are chalky. We don't really see a lot of that. The pollinators get a lot of it. And I know people that have bought nukes, and it keeps changing nukes to nuts. I don't know why it does that. Anyway, so people who have bought nukes from pollinators who have had chalk brood in them. So that's one of the things you need to be really careful of. And, there's not really any, I mean, with sac brood, if it's part of parasitic mite syndrome, then you're just treating for mites, and that'll be helpful. If it's chalk brood, you might need to requeen or something like that, and it'll usually clear itself up. There's things you can do. Other diseases, there's tracheomites. This used to be a real problem. They get into these mites, they get in through, the breathing holes, and they actually get into the trachea. And most of the breeds are pretty resistant these days. One of the real symptoms is something called K-wing. K-wing is different than deformed wing. What K-wing is, so the bee has a big wing on top and a little wing on the bottom that attach when it flies. K-wing is they're in reverse, so it'll just look like the letter K. So that's the only thing. They just sort of get twisted. So that's a big thing. But we don't really see very much in the way of tracheal mites because the bees are pretty resistant to it. But if you do have concerns about it, menthol is really good. In the wintertime, you can do 50-50 menthol and vegetable shortening, not lard, but vegetable shortening like Crisco. Make a grease patty and the bees will eat some of that. Apple Life Bar, because it has menthol in it, is also very good. Old beekeepers will also put menthol cough drops on the top of their inner cover as a way of getting a little menthol in there. So those are things that you can do just to sort of help them out, preventive kind of thing. So we're going to talk quickly about what IPM is. That's the Integrated Pest Management. And it's basically just, good beekeeper methods of dealing. It's typically doesn't involve chemicals. And you have to be really vigilant. That's the big one. You got to be able to respond quickly. And you really need to know about the life cycle of these pests so that you can deal with them before they become a problem. So that's one of the things. And you're really doing what you can to help the colony manage the pest. Some common methods are, of course, queen. So Varroa sensing hygienic, Russian, Purdue, leg biters. Those are all different queens that are really good about dealing with not just Varroa, but the hygienic ones are also other diseases. Keeping the hive at an optimum population level. So lots of bees, the bees are able to actually patrol the whole area because like things with wax moths, if there's not enough bees to get everywhere, the wax moths will move in and take over. So don't over super. It's a fine line when we're talking about honey and supering because you've got to give them enough room when they're building up the brood nest and when they're bringing in nectar because they need space to dry it out. But you don't want to give them so much room that they don't know that they can't patrol it. So that's a little tricky. And in the winter, as they're starting to eat their stores and stuff, you may end up taking equipment off. So that's things you can do. Bees full sunshine or as much sunshine as possible. That's one of the things that we know really is helpful in dealing with hive beetles and also Varroa. Ventilation screen bottom boards, and I also put a little shim so there's just a little crack where my outer cover is so that there's good airflow coming through. You can also do something called drone brood trapping, where you buy these drone frames. They're green. You put them in. They're big so that they'll, if the bees draw them out, that'll all be drone comb. And then once they're capped, you just take that whole frame out, and you got to be vigilant because you do not want these to start to emerge because then you will have a serious Varroa. Varroa will go to the drone cells first because they get a couple extra days. They can, get more babies that are, old enough to live on their own. So anyway, so once they're capped, you take them out, you put them in the freezer. It'll kill all the pupa in there, and it'll also kill the Varroa. You can put it back in, and the bees will clean it up. Or you can, use an uncapper and scratch them open and pull them out. It's just easy. The bees can clean them up. That's pretty easy. If you have chickens, they really like this kind of stuff. So you can give them to the chicken. You can do it yourself drone comb. This is a really easy one to give to the chickens. And sometimes you'll end up doing this because you'll just not have the right equipment available. So if this is an example of putting a like a medium frame in a deep box or putting a shallow frame in there, the bees will build on the bottom of it, and they mostly will build drone comb. And then what you do is once it's capped, you just take your hive tool or a knife and you cut it off and you throw it away, or you feed it to your chickens. So that's one way to do trapping. So this is the pyramid of integrated pest management tactics. So at the very bottom level is cultural. I'm going to go through all these different real quickly. Cultural, and then the next level is physical mechanical, the next level is biological, the next level is chemical, but biorational pesticides as opposed to the top level, which is conventional pesticides. So you want to try to do as many things to help the bees help themselves as you can, and then add other things as you go up. And so quickly, I'm going to just go through some examples. So cultural controls, site location in the sunshine, resistant queens, small cell foundation. Remember I said we went with the bigger cells to get bigger bees. They do sell small cell foundations so that you'll get smaller bees. And then breaking the brood cycle is also something you can do. You can just sort of, either requeening or trapping the queen so she can't lay for a couple weeks. Mechanical controls are things like the sticky boards, where the varroa fall on the sticky boards and get stuck there, or screen bottom boards where there's more ventilation, drone trapping, requeening, or the hive beetle traps. Those are all mechanical kinds of controls. Biological controls are the things I talked about, like the bacillus thuringiensis or the nematodes for the small hive beetles. Those are things that you can do that are biological controls. Those are the only ones I can think of off the top of my head. The biopesticides or biorational pesticides, the next level, this is using basically things like essential oils. You can either make your own or like Honeybee Healthy is one of those. Organic acids like the oxalic or the formic acid. Powdered sugar, I don't know if anybody's really doing that anymore. It used to be that you could just, for a whole bunch of weeks, you would just go in and you would basically sift powdered sugar over the brood area, and and then you put a sticky board under it, and the varroa fall off and get stuck on the sticky board. And that's one way of helping reduce the varroa count. Different repellents, I have no idea exactly what that would be, except that I had read that if you have um, robbing behavior going on, if you put some Vicks Vapor Rub at the entrance, the bees that live there will still figure out how to get there, but the smells will repel the other bees and confuse them. And then the diatomaceous earth that you can use under the hive is another one of those things that you can use. And then the conventional pesticides, as I said, the Kumafloss, I don't even think they're selling it anymore. Apistan, the Amatrez with the Apivar or Tactic, and Tactic I heard was banned in the US now. Fumagellin B for the nosemas, and that's, like I said, questionable. The paradichlorobenzene, for the moths, for the wax moths. Tylosin is something that they were using for American foul brood, and you'd have to get that through a veterinarian. And like I said, you really want to talk to an apiary inspector or somebody that can help you make that decision. Terramycin, again, they use it for a couple different things, including European foul brood. And again, you would need a veterinarian for those. Other kinds of pests, bears and skunks, electric bear. If you have bears around, you got to do an electric fence, and they may still get in. I mean, I've seen where bears have dug holes under the fences and gotten in, and they eat the brood. The saying is, Yogi eats the honey, the bears eat the brood. They're in it for, they might eat the honey too, because a little sweetness never hurts, but they're in it for the protein. And skunks are really a serious problem. This is one of the reasons that we put bees up on stands so that the skunks' bellies are exposed, because that's the only thing that will really affect the skunk, is if they get stung in the belly. You can also put nail boards, and you can just make a nail board and put it under the hive entrance so they can't really get close to the hive entrance. I've had I've helped with hives that have been under attack by skunks long enough that we had the double suit to work the hive. So skunks are serious. Um, Ants are another pest. They're more of a nuisance than they are a problem for the bees. And I understand that um, if you're in a place that has, what are the ones we had? Fire ants, like we had in Texas. They're a really good way to get rid of varroa. So anyway, and I use cinnamon. I just put it like on the inner cover and on the very edge. I just sprinkle some cinnamon around there, and the small ants will eat that and take it away, and then they can't digest it and they die. Or you could put grits up there for the big ants. Sometimes people put hive stands that have like little pans around the legs, and you could put oil or water in there. You'll also trap a few bees in there. Wind and natural events or other problems, if you have someplace where one of my hives in Pilot Mountain, there was a microburst that came through. It picked up. I had two hives on an 8-foot stand, one on one end and one on the other. It picked up one of them, and it was a big hive, and it was all strapped together. It picked it up and moved it off the stand. That thing probably weighed easily 90 or 100 pounds, and it still picked it up and moved it. So, that's one of the things that we always do. I now just strap them down to the concrete blocks that my hive stand is on. So, um, and you'll see that people put rocks and other things on top of their hives, and that's because things, the wind can blow things off. Big tree branches, if they're around and they fall on your hive, that can be a real problem. And then there's other things like flooding. If you get a lot of snow somewhere, you need to make sure the bees have an entrance where they can get in and out. Pesticides is always a real problem. We talk about replacing brood frames every couple of years. In the book, she talks about if you hold it up to the light and can't see through it, you should probably replace it. We know that because bees are picking up pesticides because they're everywhere in our environment, they're bringing it back and it's getting in the wax. So every couple years, we really should go in, and especially the brood frames. Um, and then, seven dust. We talked about this with the way bees are gathering pollen, because seven dust is about the same particulate level as pollen. And so they'll pick it up and take it back to the hive and it'll kill them. So try to educate people as much as you can. And, if you're going to use a pesticide, spray it early in the morning or late afternoon, like after 5. So it has time for the liquid to dry. And don't ever spray pesticides on blooming plants. That's actually illegal. Anyway, and also you have to stay aware of what's in your environment. Those are really important, because like, they started building across the street from where my bees are, and that there was lots of pesticide use. Okay, so that's basically it. Next week, I'm a little over here, but next week is a catch-up week. And I want to talk about stings. I want to talk about other resources and how do you stay up to date? How do you know what to do? And some of the different things that I've learned at the conferences and in the publications and organizations, and some of the advantages, like in clubs, honey extractors can be really, really expensive. For $10 or $15 membership in a club, you have access to that kind of stuff. So that's a really good reason to do that. And I also want to talk a little bit more about installing nukes and packages. And anything else y'all want to talk about, we can talk about next week. And then the following week is Easter and spring break. And so we won't be meeting that week. When we come back, we'll be talking about being in the hive and how to do inspections.